"You're no longer a fit for this place," the executive told her, as Clara stood in the kitchen where she'd cooked for 17 years, still holding the same apron, the same recipe book, and a quiet dignity they never understood. No one thanked her. No one walked her out. But miles away, a young man had just learned the truth about who he was, and the only thing he asked his father for was help finding the woman who once saved him from starving. 1 week later, a Rolls-Royce stopped in front of her tiny apartment. The man who stepped out held a torn paper bag from a decade ago and whispered, "Miss Clara, do you remember what you wrote on this?" Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The rain had been falling since morning. Thin sheets of it swept across the sidewalks of Willow Creek, curling around the corners of shuttered shops and drifting through the quiet air like something unfinished. It was the kind of rain that soaked through coats, slipped down your collar, and stayed with you long after you'd gone inside. But Clara Whitmore didn't go inside. She stood motionless just outside the door of the Hearth and Oak, clutching a damp cardboard box to her chest. Her breath came in soft, uneven puffs. She wore her old, faded apron one last time, as if it were armor, and for 17 years, maybe it had been. The front window still bore the restaurant's name in curling gold script, though a newer sign now hung crooked in the corner. Under new management, Clara didn't cry. Not quite, but the edges of her vision blurred, and the tears, if any, blended easily into the rain. Inside that box were the small things no one else wanted: her recipe notebook, a jar of dried thyme from the back shelf, a cloth spoon holder sewn by her mother, and a hand-scribbled note that had once read, "Employee of the Month," now barely legible from age. She hadn't said goodbye to anyone. Not because no one cared, but because Clara had never been the kind of woman people remembered to miss until she was already gone. At 43, Clara lived alone in a modest apartment above a laundromat 2 blocks from the bay. No family, no pets, no wedding ring on her hand. The only voices that ever spoke her name belonged to 2 elderly neighbors and a post office clerk who still remembered her P.M.O. box by heart. She walked to work every morning before sunrise, always in that same washed-out green coat and scuffed black shoes. She carried her mother's leather-bound recipe book with both hands like it was something sacred. And maybe, into her, it was. The Hearth and Oak had never been a glamorous place. It sat tucked behind a quiet intersection near the park, where fishermen gathered in the mornings and teenagers loitered at dusk. It wasn't trendy, or fast, or fancy, but the locals came anyway for Clara's cooking, even if they didn't know her name. Every soup had depth. Every loaf of bread had warmth. And somehow, the scrambled eggs on Tuesdays tasted exactly like childhood. Clara wasn't loud. She didn't demand attention or carry herself with flair. But she moved through the kitchen with a quiet rhythm that made even chaos seem patient. When a fryer broke or the dishwasher quit, she rolled up her sleeves and fixed it herself without complaint, without spectacle. Most days, she worked from open to close. She ate standing up. She cleaned more than anyone else. And when tips were short, she slipped $20 into the tip jar and walked away before anyone noticed. People didn't gossip about Clara. Not because she was mysterious, but because kindness, when done silently, tends to disappear behind the noise. It wasn't until her final week that someone noticed something small but unforgettable. A new waitress, barely 19, came in for her second shift shivering. Her jacket was torn, her scarf missing. No one said much, just glanced and moved on. But when she opened her locker that night, there it was, her coat, mended with careful hand stitching. A new scarf folded neatly beside it. No note, no explanation. Only Clara, sitting quietly by the sink, drying her hands with a dish towel like nothing had happened. She'd spent her lunch break fixing it with a sewing kit she kept in her drawer. No one knew, and Clara never told. The next morning, without warning, she was called into the office. 2 men in tailored suits sat across from her. One was barely 30. The other never looked up from his tablet. "We appreciate your time here," the younger one said, not quite making eye contact. But we're going in a new direction, more tech-savvy, faster systems, younger energy. Clara nodded. We'll process your final paycheck this week. We ask that you gather your things by noon. She nodded again. She didn't argue. She didn't ask for a second chance. She just gathered her apron, her box, and quietly walked out the same door she had walked into every morning for nearly 2 decades. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. The street was mostly empty, save for a boy on a bicycle and a tired man waiting at the corner bus stop. Clara looked up once at the sign "The Hearth and Oak," then turned away before the cold could settle too deeply into her bones. She didn't know where she'd go next. The rent was due in 2 weeks. Her savings wouldn't last long, but something inside her stayed steady, like it always had. Not angry, not bitter, just steady. As she walked past the alley behind the restaurant, she paused by instinct. It was quiet now. The crates were gone. The back door locked tight, but for years that small space behind the building had meant something else entirely, something only she had known. Clara looked at the spot near the fence post, where she used to place a brown paper bag, twice a day, one at noon, and one just after dusk. She never told anyone, but for 9 years, she had split her own meal in 2 and left half for a boy who never gave his name, a boy with wide eyes and hands cracked from the cold. He never spoke, never asked. He only waited and bowed and disappeared into the shadows after receiving the bag. Sometimes it had a sandwich, sometimes soup and toast, always a small milk carton, and always a handwritten note that said something simple, like, "Eat well, sweetheart. Don't be afraid." Clara blinked. The rain stung a little now. That boy hadn't come in years. But still, even now, she found herself checking that spot, out of habit, out of memory, out of something that felt like love. She adjusted her grip on the cardboard box, took one last look at the alley, then stepped out into the rain and disappeared down the street, as quietly as she had lived. No one waved goodbye, but someone, somewhere, still remembered. They just hadn't arrived yet. She hadn't walked far when the memories began to stir. The wind caught the edge of her coat, and the sidewalk blurred beneath her steps. But Clara didn't feel the rain anymore. She was already somewhere else in a memory 9 winters old. It was the first week of December. The air in Willow Creek had turned sharp and brittle. Street lamps glowed against the fog, and the dumpsters behind the Hearth and Oak steamed faintly like tired beasts in the cold. That was the night she first saw him. A boy, maybe 8, thin, silent, and crouched low behind a stack of soggy cardboard. His coat didn't fit. His shoes were torn at the toes. But what Clara remembered most was the stillness. He didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't move, just watched her with eyes too tired for his age. She didn't say a word. She went back inside, cut her sandwich in half, poured the rest of her soup into a spare container, and added a milk carton from the staff fridge. She packed it all into a brown paper bag, folded the top, and scrawled something on it before stepping out again. She placed it gently near where he sat. The boy looked up, startled. Clara gave a faint nod, then turned away, saying nothing. He didn't eat right away. He waited until she had gone back inside. That night, she wrote a note on a fresh piece of paper. "Eat well, sweetheart. Don't be afraid," then tucked it into the next day's bag. She didn't expect him to return, but he did, at exactly noon, and again, just after dusk, day after day, week after week, for 9 years. Clara never asked for his name. She didn't call out to him, didn't ask where he slept or if he went to school. She only left the bag in the same spot every time, and he, in return, bowed his head gently, took it with both hands, and disappeared. Over time, she began to notice things. His hands grew less shaky, his eyes more alert. On rare occasions, she caught a glimpse of a smile when he reached for the bag. Not a full smile, just the kind that flickered, then vanished, like a candle fighting wind. One winter evening, the rain came in sideways. It pounded the roof and turned the alley behind the restaurant into a stream of slush and broken leaves. Clara stood near the stove, frowning at the storm. Then she pulled out an old plastic container, carefully sealed that night's meal inside it, and added a note. It's cold and wet tonight. Find a dry place to sleep. Okay. She wrapped the container in 2 layers of paper towels and tucked it into the bag like it was something fragile. The next day, the container was gone, but the paper towel had been folded and left behind, neatly, deliberately. That's how she knew he'd seen the message. In the kitchen, no one spoke of the boy, but whispers grew. Clara's feeding someone behind the dumpster. She's giving away staff food. It's going to attract more of them. One afternoon, a line cook scoffed when he saw her add extra cheese to the sandwich. You think you're saving the world with this? Clara didn't answer. She just folded the sandwich carefully, sealed the bag, and walked out the back door like she always did. A week later, her manager pulled her aside. He was younger than her by at least 15 years, but his voice carried that certain clipped tone used by people who think kindness comes with policy forms. Clara, I've been told you're giving out food again. You know that's not allowed. It's a liability. If someone gets sick. She stood still, hands clasped in front of her apron. We appreciate your dedication. Really? But this is a business. We're not a soup kitchen. She nodded slowly. I understand. The next day, she brought an extra sandwich again. That was Clara. No drama, no rebellion, just quiet insistence in the form of a brown paper bag. She never told anyone the boy's name, mostly because she didn't know it. But she began to call him something in her mind Noah. Not because he told her, but because one day she left a note signed C, and the next morning, in trembling handwriting, he left one in return. Thank you, Miss C. I'm okay today. N. After that, she started signing all the notes. And each time, he replied in little scribbles on napkins or corners of torn paper. I got a blanket last week. It helps. The man by the hardware store gave me gloves. One day I'll buy you lunch instead. Sometimes he didn't leave anything, but the bag was always gone. By the time he was 13, he had grown taller, less quiet, but still gentle. He started leaving behind small things, dried flowers, a smooth rock shaped like a heart, once even a bracelet made from woven grass. Clara kept every single one. At night, when the restaurant went quiet, she would sit near the back prep counter, take out her little tin box, and look at the scraps. Not because she needed them, but because they reminded her that someone still needed her. For 9 years, twice a day, without fail. Clara Whitmore made sure a boy named Noah Bennett, though no one else ever knew that name, did not go to bed hungry. She sacrificed half her own meals to make it happen, even when her stomach ached. Even when the shift was hard and her legs trembled, she'd close her eyes, take a breath, and say softly under her breath, as long as he eats, I'm fine. In time, even the kitchen staff stopped questioning her, not because they approved, but because Clara had become an immovable part of the routine. She was like the kitchen light. Quiet, always on, always steady. And then, one day, she wasn't. Noah didn't come. Not at noon, not at night. She waited. For 3 days. On the 4th, there was a note at the fence post, folded small, edges smudged with grease. Miss C, I found a job. It's time I try. I'll do my best, the way you always did for me. Love. Noah. Clara stood in the alley, holding the note like it might disappear if she blinked. She read it once, then again, and for the first time in years, she cried, not because he left, but because he had made it far enough to choose his own direction. She never heard from him again, but every night, even after he was gone, she found herself looking toward the back door around 8:15, just in case one day he might return, not for the meal, but for the woman who never stopped believing he was worth feeding. For months after Noah's final note, the alley behind the hearth and oak stayed quiet. Clara still packed the meals for a while, just in case, but eventually, she stopped leaving them. Not because she lost hope, but because hope, in its truest form, knows when to let go. Still, she kept the last note, folded neatly inside the back cover of her recipe book. "I'll do my best, the way you always did for me." That single line lived in her like a second heartbeat. She didn't know where Noah went. She didn't ask. He was no longer the small, silent child curled up in the shadows. He had chosen his path, and Clara, like always, let him go, quietly. 5 winters passed, and far from Willow Creek, in a small city in Northern California, snow began to fall. It was a bitter Tuesday afternoon. The roads were slick, and the air bit through gloves. Commuters huddled at the bus stops, heads low, collars high. Across the street from an auto repair shop, an elderly man collapsed beside the curb. He clutched his chest, eyes wide with panic, body seizing in the slush. People froze. No one moved. Until a young man sprinted from the garage across the street, hands still covered in oil, wrench dropping behind him as he ran. It was Noah, now 22, taller, stronger, worn, but steady. He knelt beside the man without hesitation, checked his pulse, lifted him up not just by the shoulders but fully, like someone used to carrying weight, and he ran, through the snow, through traffic, half a mile to the nearest emergency room. They made it in time, barely. Inside the trauma unit, doctors rushed in, alarms beeped, voices overlapped. A nurse turned and yelled, "We need AB negative blood stat. He won't make it without a transfusion." Silence. That blood type was rare. Almost no one had it. Noah stepped forward, breath shallow but eyes firm. "I have that blood. I've donated before. Hook me up. Please just hurry." Within minutes, they had him connected. He didn't flinch when the needle went in. He just kept his gaze on the hallway, as if willing the old man to live. Later that night, a young resident doctor posted the story online. He included a photo grainy, taken from the corner of the ER. A young man with oil-stained sleeves, sitting in a plastic chair, IV in his arm, head bowed in exhaustion. The caption read, "Stranger with rare blood saves elderly man during snowstorm." No name given, just said, "Do what you have to." By morning, the photo had gone viral. Thousands shared it. The story made the local news, then national news. People wanted to know who he was, but Noah disappeared before the cameras arrived. He went back to work, back to tightening bolts and rotating tires, a few hundred miles away, in a Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park. Thomas Grayson sat at dinner with his adult daughter. She flipped through channels lazily until the news clip paused. "That guy," she said, pointing. "He looks kind of like you when you were young." Thomas looked up, absent-mindedly, then froze. The screen showed a still from the ER. A profile shot, the tilt of the jaw, the arch of the brow, but it wasn't the resemblance to himself that made his hands tremble. It was the eyes. Not just their shape, but the quiet behind them. He stood up without saying a word, walked to his office, and opened a drawer he hadn't touched in 15 years. Inside was a sealed envelope. The handwriting had faded, but he knew it by heart. The last letter from the woman he had loved, Evelyn Bennett. She had slipped away quietly after his family forced the breakup. No calls, no contact, just one letter. "If it's a boy, I want to name him Noah." For a moment, the room swayed. Thomas pressed his palms flat against the desk and tried to breathe. The next morning, he called the hospital in California. They wouldn't release the name, but they confirmed a few details. A man named Noah Bennett had donated AB-negative blood to save a patient. No known relatives. Lived in a shared boarding house across from a body shop. Thomas sent his assistant, then a courier, then went himself. He had a DNA test arranged through quiet channels. The result came in 3 days later. 98% match. Paternal. He didn't cry, but something in him broke, and quietly, permanently. For over 2 decades, he had lived with wealth, power, respect. He had closed deals worth hundreds of millions, owned homes in 6 countries, and yet his own son had grown up sleeping beside dumpsters, eating from paper bags. Not once did Thomas ask aloud, how could this happen instead? He asked the only question that mattered. Who kept him alive? It was his father, Walter Grayson, who answered. An old man now, harder with age, but when he saw the photo of Noah, even he lowered his voice. We wronged her, he said simply. That woman, Evelyn, but someone else must have stepped in where we didn't. Thomas nodded once. We're going to meet him, but not for us. Walter raised a brow. Then for who? Thomas looked down at the photo again. His voice was quiet. For the one who never asked for anything in return. That same week, a midnight black Rolls-Royce pulled out of the Grayson garage. No security, no press, just 2 men, a father and grandfather, sitting in silence. They crossed 3 states without saying much. Every so often, Thomas would take out the photo, study it, and wonder about the years they couldn't get back. They arrived in California 2 days later. The garage was modest, grease-stained, the kind of place where workers wiped their hands on old rags and music played low from dusty radios. Noah was outside, tightening bolts under a lifted hood. He stood as the car pulled up, confused but cautious, the kind of caution learned from years of uncertainty. Thomas stepped out first. He didn't wear a suit, just a simple sweater and coat. His hands trembled slightly. Noah, he said. The young man looked up, wiped his palms on his jeans. Yeah, Walter stepped out next. Slower, older. The 3 stood there for a moment, wind blowing softly between them. You look just like her, Walter whispered. Thomas took a breath, then another. I'm your father, he said, and this is your grandfather. Noah didn't speak, didn't step forward, but he didn't back away either. He watched them, carefully, and something behind his eyes began to shift. A flicker, then stillness, then warmth. They sat down on a bench near the sidewalk. No cameras, no speeches. Thomas didn't ask for forgiveness. He just explained, quietly, honestly, with no defense. When he was done, Noah nodded, slowly. I'm not angry, he said. Thomas blinked. I'm not lost either, Noah added. But I don't want your money. Or your name. He looked up. There's only one thing I want. They waited. Help me find the woman who fed me for 9 years. I owe her my whole life. Spring arrived gently in Willow Creek. The rain had softened. The air carried that quiet scent of something beginning again. On a Thursday morning, Clara Whitmore found a cream-colored envelope slipped beneath her apartment door. No return address, no letter inside. Just a single card, written in gold script, you are cordially invited to the grand reopening of the place where you once made everyone feel at home. Clara stared at it for a long time. Her first thought was that it wasn't meant for her. She hadn't made anyone feel at home, not officially. Not in any way people would remember. But something about the way it was worded pulled at her chest. She didn't plan to stay long. Just walk by, maybe peek through the window, then go. But when she turned onto Main Street and saw the corner building, she froze. The old sign for the Hearth and Oak was gone. In its place, freshly painted in warm white lettering, was a new name, Clara's Table, where every child has a seat. Her hands trembled. She took a step back. The sight of her name out in the open, in daylight, felt overwhelming. Not because it was large or elegant, but because it meant someone had remembered. She was about to turn away when the front door opened. A young woman in a crisp apron stepped out, eyes kind, voice steady. Are you? Clara, she asked softly. Please come in. Everyone's waiting for you. Inside. The space had changed, but the warmth hadn't. The walls glowed with soft amber lights. The tables were rustic, simple, but inviting. And something about the way people looked at Clara made her pause, not curious, not amused, but respectful, gently so. A man by the window stood as she entered. Others followed. One woman placed a hand over her heart. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, is that her?" Clara walked slowly, as if in a dream. She hadn't spoken yet, wasn't sure she could. Then, outside, a single black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the curb. No entourage, no cameras, just quiet presence. The door opened. Thomas Grayson stepped out first, dressed simply, hands clasped in front of him. His silver hair shimmered slightly in the morning light. He walked toward Clara like a man who had spent years rehearsing a single sentence. He stopped a few feet away and bowed his head. "You don't know me," he said softly, "but you knew my grandson." Clara blinked. He continued, voice faltering but sincere. "For 9 years, you fed him. You never asked for anything. And because of you, he lived." There were murmurs in the room, but no one interrupted. Then, from the passenger side, Noah Bennett stepped out. He was taller now, shoulders broader, hands steady, but his eyes were the same. That same quiet, that same gratitude. He didn't rush. He just walked to her deliberate, calm, and stopped in front of the woman who had once handed him his only meal of the day. In his hands, he held a small, worn box. Without a word, he opened it and placed it gently in hers. Inside was a folded, faded piece of paper. Clara didn't need to unfold it. She already knew what it said. "Today I packed you an extra milk. Eat well, sweetheart." Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled. Noah spoke, barely above a whisper. "I've had this since before I could even read. I kept every one of your notes, every bag, every word." He looked up at her, voice clear now. "And today, I want to give something back. This place, this restaurant, it was always yours. Now, it is yours." Clara couldn't speak. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. For years, she had been invisible. But in this moment, she was seen fully, deeply, and without condition. She didn't ask how it had happened, or who paid for it, or why. She just stepped forward and hugged him. The restaurant reopened that day without a single ad. No fanfare, no press release. But by the next morning, there was a line stretching around the block. People didn't come just for the food. They came for the story, for the warmth, for the quiet presence of a woman who once packed brown paper bags for a boy she didn't know. Every day, dozens of free meals were served. No names were asked, no proof of hardship required. If someone knocked, there was always a plate waiting. Clara never took a salary. Every dollar of profit went back into the kitchen used to expand it, to hire more staff, many of whom had once been homeless themselves. And for the teenagers from the neighborhood who struggled at school or had nowhere to go after hours, Clara opened her doors wide. She taught them how to cook, not just recipes, but steadiness, patience, quiet pride. In the back pantry hung a simple wooden sign: "Kindness doesn't need a reason, just a place to begin." The Grayson family, who had once turned away from a woman named Evelyn Bennett, now quietly funded a nonprofit called One Warm Meal, a program dedicated to feeding underprivileged children across the state. They never asked for their name to be listed. That, too, was by design. Clara's table became more than a restaurant. It became a symbol for second chances, for unseen heroes, for what could happen when one person decided to love without asking anything in return. And the boy she once called sweetheart, he came every Sunday, not for food, but to sit with her in the corner booth, talk about the week, and sometimes on quiet afternoons read back her old notes aloud, like scripture. Because in a world full of noise, one woman's quiet kindness had spoken louder than anything else. And maybe, just maybe, that was all it ever took: a paper bag, a warm meal, and a heart that never gave up. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.